Tonight we step into the dust of southern Mesopotamia around the 4th millennium before Christ, when archaeologists first began finding clay tablets beneath mounds that had slept for thousands of years. In the late 19th century, teams working near ancient sites such as Nippur, Uruk, and Lagash uncovered fragments covered in tiny wedge-shaped signs. Scholars at the University of Pennsylvania Museum, the British Museum, and later the Oriental Institute in Chicago helped preserve and translate these tablets, slowly revealing the voice of Sumer, one of humanity's earliest urban civilizations. And yet, the more the tablets spoke, the stranger the silence around them became. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the night settles in, tell us where you're listening from, and what time it is outside your window. Somewhere, perhaps, rain touches glass. Somewhere else, a ceiling fan turns slowly in the warm dark. And somewhere in your room, an ancient question waits with unusual patience. You are not standing in a museum tonight. Not at first. You're walking across a flat, open land beneath a pale sky, where the air tastes faintly of salt, mud, and sun-baked reeds. The rivers move slowly nearby, thick with silt, carrying the colour of old bronze. The ground is cracked in places, damp in others, and every step presses into soil that once fed the first cities. The world is wide and quiet. In the distance, a mud brick temple rises above the plain, its edges softened by heat. It does not gleam like marble. It does not tower like later monuments of empire. It sits low, heavy, and practical, made from earth itself, as if the building has grown out of the ground rather than been placed upon it. Around it, people move in narrow lanes. You hear sandals brushing dust. You hear animals snorting beside reed fences. You smell smoke from cooking fires, wet clay from fresh bricks, and the sharp green scent of river plants drying in bundles. This is Sumer, though the people walking past you do not use that word as a modern label. They live in city-states, each one proud, nervous, sacred, and hungry. Uruk, Eridu, Lagash, Nippur, names that sound distant now, but once carried the weight of power, harvest, law, and prayer. Records confirm that Uruk became one of the earliest great urban centres in world history, with monumental architecture, administration, trade, and writing. Archaeologists from major institutions, including scholars connected with German excavations at Uruk and American research on early Mesopotamia, have traced its rise through pottery, seals, tablets, and temple remains. This is not legend. This is soil, brick, and accounting. Very glamorous, obviously, because when writing first appears here, it does not begin with love poetry or heroic confession. It begins mostly with lists, grain, sheep, labour, beer, fields, jars, rations. Humanity invents writing and immediately uses it for paperwork. The ancient world, it seems, also had administrators with excellent job security, yet those little marks matter. A tablet fits in the palm of a hand. It is not dramatic at first glance. It is brown, dense, and quiet, like a clod of earth with memory trapped inside. But once a reed stylus presses into wet clay, a human intention becomes durable, a sound becomes a sign, a number becomes a claim, a name becomes something that can survive its owner. You hold one in your imagination now. Its surface is uneven. The corners are chipped. One side is crowded with marks that look, to untrained eyes, like bird tracks frozen in mud. But each mark has been placed there by someone who knew a system, someone trained to preserve a piece of reality. A ration issued, a worker counted, a temple offering recorded, a god named, and that is where the mystery begins to breathe. The Sumerian texts do not simply describe a people building cities. They describe a world already ordered by powers older than humankind. In hymns, myths, temple lists, royal inscriptions, and later copied traditions, The Sumerians speak as if civilization was not invented by ordinary humans alone. It was received. It was arranged. It was handed down from the divine realm to specific places on earth. Perhaps this is only sacred storytelling. Perhaps it is politics dressed in the robes of heaven. Perhaps kings and priests use divine language to make human power feel inevitable. Still, the pattern is hard to ignore. The cities are not merely settlements, they are homes of gods. The temples are not merely public buildings. They are households for unseen rulers. The king is not merely a strong man with soldiers. He is chosen, blessed, measured, and watched. In one old tradition, kingship is said to descend from heaven, not emerge from a village meeting, not grow slowly from practical need. Descend. The word itself has weight, as though authority falls from the sky like a sealed decree. That idea has unsettled readers for generations. Modern scholars debate whether such phrases should be understood as theology, political ideology, ritual language, or distant memory transformed into myth. Some researchers at universities such as Oxford, Yale, and Chicago tend to emphasize social structure, temple, economy, and scribal tradition. Others ask whether the texts preserve fragments of older events, reshaped through centuries of copying. No careful historian treats myth as a newspaper, but no careful historian ignores myth either. You walk closer to the temple. The mud brick walls radiate the stored heat of the day. A worker passes with a basket on his back. A scribe sits nearby, pressing signs into clay while another man speaks softly. The tablet is not poetry, it is inventory. But nearby, in the same culture, other tablets tell of gods shaping human destiny, of floods swallowing cities, of kings reigning for spans that make ordinary time seem fragile. A quirky old claim appears in later Mesopotamian traditions, where certain ancient rulers reign not for decades, but for thousands of years. One king may rule longer than any empire can sensibly last. Another belongs to a city that seems half real, half remembered dream. To modern ears, it sounds impossible. To ancient scribes, it may have sounded authoritative, sacred, or simply very old. The line between exaggeration and encoded meaning is not always neat. You can almost feel the clay cooling in the evening air. The sun lowers. Shadows stretch from reed huts and courtyard walls. Somewhere, someone pours beer into a jar. Somewhere else, a priest recites words in a language that will one day vanish from common speech, then survive only because scribes refuse to let it die. That is one of the great ironies of Sumer. The people disappear into history, but their language remains trapped in schools, rituals, and tablets. Later, Akkadian-speaking scribes study Sumerian as a learned language, rather like medieval scholars studying Latin. It becomes ancient even to the ancients. The past already has a past, and you, standing in this imagined dusk, begin to sense why the mystery endures. Archaeology gives us walls, drains, ovens, graves, cylinder seals, and tablets. It shows how cities grew, how officials counted goods, how temples organized labor, and how rulers advertised their strength. It gives the hard outline of a society. The texts give something else. They give a way of seeing reality. In that vision, humans are not alone at the center. They are late arrivals. They work beneath a sky crowded with authority. Their cities belong to powers beyond them. Their labor has a reason, perhaps noble, perhaps uncomfortable. Their kingship is not merely human ambition. It is part of a cosmic arrangement that has already begun before any individual is born. There is comfort in that idea. There is also unease, because if the Sumerians believed civilization was given, then you must ask what they thought existed before the gift. If kingship descended, where did it descend from? If humans were assigned a role, who assigned it? And if the tablets preserve only broken pieces, what part of the story has been lost? The night deepens over the plain. The river grows darker. The temple becomes a shape against the last red light. quiet and watchful. In the cooling courtyards, clay tablets dry slowly, preserving rations, names, offerings, myths, and strange claims that will outlive the hands that made them. You listen, not for thunder, not for spectacle, only for the small, dry whisper of a stylus entering clay. That sound is enough. It is the beginning of written memory. It is also the beginning of a mystery that refuses to close. For a moment, it feels as though the first cities are not behind you at all. They are beneath you. Layer under layer, word under word, a buried arrangement of gods, workers, kings, rivers, and clay, waiting for someone patient enough to read without pretending the answer is simple. Perhaps the tablets do not reveal one secret. Perhaps they reveal a world where every secret was written as a duty, a prayer and an account. And somewhere in that quiet, between the warm mud brick and the darkening river, Sumer begins to speak. Your mind drifts toward a quieter chamber, away from the open heat of the plain, into a room where clay lies stacked in patient rows. The smell is different here. Not river reeds and animal pens, but dry dust, old shelves, faint wax smoke, and the mineral scent of earth that has been baked by time. You see tablets no larger than a hand. Some are whole, some are cracked across the middle, some are only corners, broken edges, and surviving signs. They look modest, almost disappointing, until you remember what they have done. They have refused to forget. Clay is humble material. A child can press a thumb into it. A builder can shape it into bricks. A potter can turn it into bowls. But in Sumer, clay became something stranger. It became memory with weight. It became a surface where numbers, names, prayers, debts, and myths could sleep for more than 5,000 years. The earliest writing from southern Mesopotamia appears around the late 4th millennium before Christ. Excavations at Uruk revealed early tablets filled with pictorial and numerical signs, connected to administration and temple activity. Scholars at institutions such as Oxford, Chicago, and the University of Pennsylvania have long studied these signs as part of the slow birth of writing. That fact is steady, but the feeling is not steady at all. You lean closer to one small tablet, and the marks seem almost alive. They are not letters in the modern sense, not at first. They begin as pictures, tokens, counts, and practical marks. A jar, a head of livestock, a measure of grain. Over time, the signs become more abstract, pressed with a reed stylus in wedge-shaped strokes. The result is cuneiform, a writing system used for thousands of years across the ancient Near East. It begins in service to records, yet eventually carries hymns, law codes, royal boasts, medicine, astronomy, letters, lamentations, school jokes, curses, and stories of creation. Paper would have vanished. Clay remained. There is something almost comical in that. The ancient world accidentally chose an archive material tougher than most modern office storage. Fire, which destroys so much, sometimes hardened the tablets. A burning building could become a kiln. Disaster could preserve the paperwork. One imagines a poor ancient clerk thinking the day was ruined, while history quietly smiled. The tablet does not care who wins. It lies in ruins with the patience of stone, waiting for hands not yet born. You move through a museum storehouse in the mind. Drawers slide open, labels carry site names and excavation numbers. Each object has a human trace, but the humans are gone. A thumbprint may remain on the side. A fingernail mark may survive near the edge. Sometimes a scribe smooths the surface carefully. Sometimes the writing is cramped, hurried, and practical. The clay preserves personality without meaning to. One tablet may list barley rations for workers, another may record temple property, another may hold a school exercise, where a student copies signs again and again, probably while wishing the day would end. Some tablets include mistakes, some have corrections, some look as though the scribe was learning, struggling, perhaps being judged by a stern teacher. Humanity becomes visible in the pressure of a reed. Not grand humanity, ordinary humanity. Records from Mesopotamian school tablets show that scribal education was demanding, repetitive, and deeply respected. Modern Assyriologists, including researchers connected with Yale and Chicago, have reconstructed parts of the scribal curriculum from copied sign lists, proverbs, lexical texts, and model compositions. These were not casual notes. They were systems of training. The scribe was not merely a writer, he was a keeper of order. He could count land, measure grain, copy hymns, record offerings, preserve royal names, and transmit stories across generations. A king might command armies, but a scribe could decide how the command would be remembered. This is a quiet kind of power, and perhaps the most durable kind. In the tablet room, you begin to notice categories. There are administrative tablets, crisp and practical, concerned with quantities and obligations. There are literary tablets, copied and recopied in later centuries, preserving tales from an older linguistic world. There are lexical lists, where words are arranged like catalogues of existence. There are omen texts, where events are read as messages from the divine order. A sheep's liver, a storm, a birth anomaly, an eclipse. Everything might mean something. The strange tidbit here is that some ancient scribes copied lists of professions, animals, plants, stones, and objects with such care that the lists almost feel like an attempt to organize the universe. It is as if the world becomes less frightening when everything has a name, a category, and a place on a tablet. Very tidy, very ancient, slightly obsessive, and perhaps understandable. A city is a complicated animal. It eats grain, labour, timber, wool, metal, water, and trust. Without records, memory strains and fails. Someone forgets who owes barley. Someone disputes a field boundary. Someone claims the temple received 20 sheep instead of 10. Then everyone looks offended, and society becomes deeply inconvenient. Writing calms the argument, or at least it makes the argument more official. You hear the scribe's stylus tapping softly. Press, lift, turn, press again. The reed leaves triangular impressions, each wedge part of a larger pattern. The clay is wet enough to receive, firm enough to hold. The movement is small, but the consequence is enormous. A spoken word disappears into air, a written word waits. Yet this waiting creates another mystery. The Sumerian tablets come to us unevenly. We have many records of grain, animals, taxes, and labour. We have myths in copies that may be centuries younger than the traditions they preserve. We have broken lines, missing columns, lost openings, damaged endings, and texts that survive only because one tablet happened to be buried in a fortunate place. So when people say the Sumerian texts reveal a mystery, the truth is subtler. They reveal many things clearly, and they hide many things accidentally. Their silence is not always deliberate. Sometimes the missing answer was simply on the shattered half. That is almost worse, because you can see the edge. Open scholarly discussion continues over how directly later copies reflect earlier Sumerian beliefs. Some experts argue that scribal schools preserved old traditions with surprising loyalty. Others caution that every copied text passes through the hands of later teachers, later politics, and later theology. The tablet may carry an ancient voice, but that voice has travelled through many rooms. You stand among those rooms now. One is a temple office, where an administrator counts grain under the authority of a god. One is a schoolroom, where a boy repeats signs until his wrist aches. One is a royal archive, where official memory is shaped for power. One is a ruined house, where a private letter waits under collapsed brick. The sound changes in each place. In the office, the stylus is brisk. In the school, it is nervous. In the palace, it is formal. In the private house, perhaps it slows, because the message matters to one family, one dispute, one worried heart. Clay holds all of them without preference. This is why the tablets feel so strange. They are not just sacred texts. They are not just myths. They are not just accounts. They are the breath of an entire civilization, caught in fragments. The world they reveal is practical and enchanted at the same time. A rationalist may sit beside a hymn, a god may appear in an account, a worker may be recorded through temple economy. A king may be placed into a sacred lineage. Nothing is only material, nothing is only spiritual. The shelves seem to deepen around you. Tablet after tablet, drawer after drawer, each one small enough to hold, yet together forming a landscape of memory. The mystery is not hidden in one dramatic sentence. It is distributed. It lies in patterns, repetitions, habits, and strange assumptions. These people wrote as though the visible world was supervised by an invisible one. They wrote as though cities required cosmic permission. They wrote as though memory itself needed clay. And in the dimness, you begin to understand why broken tablets can feel more powerful than complete books. A complete book tells you what it wants to say. A broken tablet makes you lean closer. It asks you to imagine the missing signs while warning you not to imagine too much. That is the discipline of listening to Sumer. You do not force the clay to confess. You let it remain clay. You let the wedge marks speak in their dry, careful rhythm, grain, God, worker, king, temple, flood, name, silence. The tablet rests in your palm, cool now, heavy with time. It has survived the burning of houses, the fall of cities, the forgetting of language, the arrival of strangers, the digging of archaeologists, and the quiet numbering of museums. It has no voice, and yet it has spoken longer than anyone who made it. For a moment, it feels as though the room darkens around a single tablet, and all the other fragments withdraw into stillness. This one does not speak of sheep, jars, or rations. It does not care how many workers received barley, or which field belonged to which temple household. It reaches for something far more unstable. It reaches for the beginning of kingship. You see the surface in your mind, marked by columns of names, cities, and reigns. The text is known through several ancient copies, not one perfect original. Its surviving versions differ in places, as ancient copies often do, yet its central shape remains unforgettable. Kingship comes down from heaven. Cities hold it for a time. Then kingship moves elsewhere, as if political power is not merely seized, but transferred through a sacred current. That current passes through cities with names that feel half historical, half dreamlike: Eridu, Badtibera, Larak, Sippar, Shurupak. They appear before the Great Flood in a world where time expands until ordinary measurement becomes almost useless. A king reigns for tens of thousands of years. Another holds power beyond any human lifetime. Then another follows, immense and impossible. Records from later Mesopotamian scribal tradition preserve the Sumerian king list as one of the most fascinating attempts to organize early kingship. Modern scholars at major universities, including Oxford and Yale, treat it not as simple chronology, but as political memory shaped into sacred order. It is not a clean historical timetable, it is a map of authority. And what a strange map it is! You look closer, and the numbers seem to breathe with deliberate excess. 8 kings rule before the flood in some versions, and their combined reigns stretch across spans that no ordinary body could endure. The figures belong to a different kind of time, not the time of aching knees, hungry stomachs, and worried farmers watching the river rise. They belong to monumental time, the kind of time used for gods, ancestors, dynasties, and legitimacy. The kind of time a culture creates when it wants to say, this order is not recent, not accidental, not negotiable. Kingship is older than your grandfather, older than your city wall, older than memory itself. Still, the unease remains. Why name cities? Why list rulers? Why place impossible reigns beside recognizable geography? A purely divine myth could float in the heavens. This text does not float. It touches the mud. It names places where people built, traded, prayed, and buried their dead. That mixture is what makes it linger. The mainstream historical fact is clear enough. The Sumerian king list was likely composed and revised in a political environment where rulers wanted to connect themselves with a long chain of legitimate power. It presents kingship as moving from city to city, eventually reaching historical dynasties that can be compared with inscriptions and archaeology. The early portions, however, stretch beyond verification into sacred memory. A little convenient, perhaps. A ruler who can place himself inside a cosmic sequence has gained more than a title. He has borrowed age. He has borrowed destiny. He has turned politics into inheritance from the sky. That is not a small trick. Even modern states enjoy flags, founding myths, and solemn buildings for similar reasons. Humans adore paperwork with candles around it, yet the old list is not merely propaganda. It is too odd for that. It includes interruptions, reversals, city shifts, and the great watery break that divides the world into before and after. The flood does not simply destroy, it organizes time. It creates a wound in history, and everything on either side of it becomes charged with meaning. You hear the reed stylus again, but slower now. The scribe copies names that may already be ancient to him. Perhaps he does not fully believe every number. Perhaps belief is the wrong question. He's not writing a modern textbook. He's preserving a pattern. Kingship descends. Kingship resides. Kingship moves. Then the flood comes. The flood changes everything. The quirky tidbit is that some versions give the pre-flood kings reigns in units related to the sexagesimal system. The base 60 mathematics that Mesopotamia helped make famous. That same numerical tradition still haunts your clocks, your minutes, and your circles today. Somewhere in your ordinary hour, Sumerian number habits quietly survive. Rather rude of them, honestly. The open scholarly debate turns on how to read those extreme reign lengths. Some researchers view them as symbolic numbers expressing divine favour or primordial greatness. Others see political theology, where long reigns make early kingship seem vast and unchallengeable. A more cautious group asks whether distorted memories of ancient lineages, cities, or priestly traditions may have been folded into mathematical myth. No answer removes the mystery completely. You stand inside Shrupak in the imagination, one of the cities linked to flood tradition. The streets are narrow. The air smells of damp brick and grain dust. Children pass along walls rubbed smooth by hands. Donkeys complain in courtyards, because donkeys have always been confident critics of civilization. Above the city, the sky is pale and empty. Nothing announces the coming break. Yet in the list, the flood is a hinge. Before it, kings reign in enormous spans. After it, kingship resumes. But the scale shifts slowly towards something more human. The world does not become ordinary at once. It descends by degrees, like a dream fading as dawn enters the room. This gradual descent matters. It suggests that the list is not random fantasy. It is structured. It arranges human history as a narrowing corridor, beginning in almost divine vastness and moving toward recognizable kings, battles, cities, and dynasties. Long before recorded history, or the text seems to say, authority was already here. In a time that's no longer remembered, order had already been granted, and after disaster the grant returned. That is a powerful idea in a land where rivers nourish and threaten with the same brown water. Flooding is not an abstract symbol here. It is sound, smell, rot, loss, and silt. It can feed fields, erase boundaries, drown animals, and leave silence where voices stood yesterday. To build a theory of kingship around a flood is to build politics around survival. You imagine a listener in an ancient court hearing the list recited. The names roll past like heavy beads on a cord. Each city holds power, then loses it. Each king shines briefly, even when his reign lasts longer than any mountain kingdom should. The pattern teaches humility and obedience at once. No city owns kingship forever. No ruler holds it without the larger order. Even the greatest rain becomes a line of clay. The unsettling part is not only the impossible ages, it is the confidence of the arrangement. The text does not appear embarrassed by its scale. It does not pause to explain why a ruler could reign for 28,800 years. It simply records, as though the listener should understand that primeval time was different. Perhaps that is the hidden key. Ancient people did not always imagine the past as a smaller version of the present. They often imagined it as larger, stranger, closer to gods, heavier with power. The earliest ages were not primitive in their stories. They were immense. The world began not with ignorance, but with overwhelming order that later humans could barely inherit. That idea reverses modern instinct. You are used to thinking of progress as a climb from darkness into knowledge. The king list whispers something else. It imagines a beginning crowded with authority, followed by loss, dispersal, and imperfect continuation. The mystery is not how humans invented order from nothing. The mystery is how they received, lost, and rebuilt it. The tablet remains quiet. Its broken columns do not prove giant kings. They do not prove lost empires ruling for impossible spans. But they do prove that ancient scribes preserved a memory system in which civilization began under powers larger than human politics. They placed the first cities under heaven's shadow, then separated their world with flood water. That is enough to disturb the sleep of history. In the dim chamber, the names still wait. Eridu, Bad Tabira, Larak, Sippar, Shuruppak. Each one is a step into deep time. Each one is a door that opens partly, then stops. Behind them, kingship descends, reigns stretch beyond flesh, and the flood gathers quietly at the edge of the tablet. You do not need to solve it tonight. You only need to hear how old the question is. In your ears, the echo changes into footsteps on packed earth, slow and measured, moving through a sacred district before sunrise. The city has not fully awakened. A few hearths glow behind mud brick walls. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then thinks better of it. The air smells of damp clay, sheep wool, stale beer, and the faint sweetness of incense beginning to curl from a temple doorway. You are near the house of a god. That phrase sounds strange to modern ears, because a god is expected to be everywhere or nowhere, invisible or heavenly, far beyond walls. But here, in the Sumerian city, the divine presence has an address. It has a courtyard, storerooms, kitchens, workshops, fields, herds, offerings, priests, singers, gatekeepers, and a household economy large enough to make any modern accountant sigh softly into a cup of coffee. The temple is not an ornament. It is a living institution. In the old cities, the temple complex stands as a center of labor, ritual, storage, redistribution, and identity. Archaeological work at sites such as Uruk, Nippur, and Tello has shown that sacred buildings were closely tied to economic and political life. Scholars at Chicago, Oxford, and other major centers of Near Eastern study have described the temple as both religious heart and administrative engine. The gods, in Sumerian understanding, are not vague moral ideas. They are powerful beings with names, personalities, duties, preferences, tempers, and cities under their care. Inanna is linked with love, conflict, and terrifying vitality. Enki is associated with wisdom, fresh water, and cunning order. Enlil stands near authority, storm, and command. Ninhursag carries meanings of birth, earth, and divine motherhood. These are not decorative characters. They organize the world. You move past a wall where hands have smoothed plaster over brick. A worker carries a basket of grain into a storehouse. A priest checks a vessel. A singer waits in the dimness, perhaps ready to chant words older than his own family line. The god statue, hidden or revealed according to ritual need, is treated as more than art. It is clothed, fed, washed, honored, and approached through rules. This may feel odd unless you think about it gently. A statue is visible focus. A temple is sacred household. Ritual is the language of relationship. The city feeds the god, and the god protects the city. That is the arrangement, at least when the rivers behave. The harvest comes. Enemies stay away, and no plague begins wandering down the streets like an unwanted guest. Ancient life leaves little room for casual disbelief. Too much depends on weather, fertility, trade, birth, and survival. The gods do not merely inspire, they decide. They grant kingship, judge disputes, bless canals, punish arrogance, and withdraw favour when the order cracks. In Sumerian hymns and myths, divine beings quarrel, desire, command, trick, mourn, and build. Their world is not calm, it is organised tension. A mainstream historical fact stands firmly here. In Sumerian city-states, each major city was closely associated with a patron deity, whose temple shaped civic identity and economic life. Nippur was tied to Enlil. Uruk was strongly linked with Inanna and Anu. Eridu carried deep associations with Enki. These connections are visible in inscriptions, hymns, temple remains, and later scholarly tradition. The city belongs to its god. The king serves under that shadow. This is where human authority becomes complicated. A ruler may build walls, lead soldiers, dig canals, and issue commands, but his legitimacy is often framed through divine approval. In inscriptions, rulers present themselves as chosen, beloved, appointed, or guided by gods. They boast, of course, because kings are rarely shy creatures, yet their boasting still bends toward heaven. They do not say simply, "I am strong." They say, "The god has favoured me." That difference matters. It places human power inside a larger structure. A king who fails may not merely be unlucky. He may have lost divine support. A city that falls may not simply be weaker than another. Its god may have turned away, been angered, or been defeated within the mythology of power. History becomes theology wearing dusty sandals. The quirky tidbit is that temples employed people in roles that feel unexpectedly ordinary. There were brewers, bakers, weavers, herdsmen, door officials, lamentation singers, gardeners, and specialists handling ritual supplies. The divine household needed lunch, laundry, music, and inventory. Apparently even the gods preferred civilization with a decent supply chain. You step inside the temple courtyard. The ground is cool beneath your feet. The walls hold the last darkness of night. A doorway frames a smaller chamber, where lamp smoke clings to the ceiling. You do not see the full ritual. That is important. Sacred life is not built for tourists. Much of it remains closed, layered, and guarded by those trained to perform it. You sense presence through arrangements. A bowl placed carefully, a garment folded, a song prepared, a seal pressed into clay, a door opened at the right moment, then closed again. Open scholarly debate continues over how ordinary Sumerians imagined divine presence in daily life. Some historians emphasize public temple ritual and official theology. Others point to household objects, personal names, prayers, and charms as signs of intimate devotion beyond elite institutions. The gods of the city may have ruled from grand temples, but fear and hope also lived inside small rooms. A mother might whisper a prayer over a child. A farmer might worry about a field. A merchant might seek protection before travel. The divine world is not distant from these concerns. It presses into them. A sick body, a bad omen, a failed harvest, a broken oath, and a troubling dream may all be drawn into the same web of meaning. Nothing sits entirely outside the gaze of higher powers, and this is where the Sumerian texts become slightly unsettling again. They do not describe gods as harmless symbols invented for comfort. They describe a hierarchy in which humans occupy a lower place. The gods eat first. The gods decide first. The gods possess plans that may not be explained to mortals. A human being may pray, serve, build, praise, lament, and obey. but the divine assembly remains above the human crowd. There is order, yes, but not equality. You feel that in the architecture. The temple platform lifts sacred space above ordinary streets. The storerooms gather wealth into divine custody. The rituals regulate access. The statue does not wander casually through the market. The god is near, yet separated, present, yet controlled through ceremony, intimate, yet dangerous. It is a delicate balance. Too much distance, and the god becomes irrelevant. Too much closeness, and the god becomes manageable. The Sumerian temple holds both truths at once. The divine being lives among the people, but never becomes one of them. In myths, gods walk through mud-brick worlds with motives that feel almost human, then suddenly reveal a scale beyond humanity. They feast, they argue, they desire beautiful things, they create institutions, they release powers, they send disasters, they grant gifts that bind people into responsibility. They are familiar enough to imagine, but never safe enough to domesticate. Perhaps that is why their stories endure. A purely perfect god leaves little dust on the floor. The Sumerian gods leave dust, water, hunger, music, fear, and law. They belong to an older religious imagination, where divine beings are woven into the city's breathing machinery. They are not beyond civilization. They are the deep owners of it. The morning light now touches the high edges of the temple wall. Workers enter. The city stirs. A pot cracks somewhere. Someone curses softly, because even sacred cities begin with practical annoyance. Birds lift from a roofline. A canal glints beyond the houses. You stand still as the daily pattern resumes. Offerings move inward. Instructions move outward. Clay tablets record what must not be forgotten. The god's household consumes and redistributes. The city labours under divine names. Kings speak as servants, even when they rule like masters. Humans build the houses of gods, while believing those gods made human life meaningful, useful, and watched. The mystery has shifted shape. It is no longer only about impossible kings or buried tablets. It is about a complete structure of existence. In Sumer, the divine world is not a decoration placed on top of society. It is the frame around society, the roof above it, the foundation beneath it, and the judge waiting inside it. You listen to sandals squeak softly on clay. A priest passes through a doorway. A scribe lowers his stylus. A worker bends under a load. The god remains unseen, yet everything has been arranged around that absence, or perhaps, to the Sumerian mind, around that presence. The scent of warm bread drifts through the temple court, mixed with the sour sweetness of beer and the darker smell of wet clay. You feel the morning settle into its rhythm. Workers move in lines. Baskets rise and fall. A door creaks on a wooden pivot. Somewhere a child laughs, then is hushed, because sacred places prefer their noise carefully measured. You begin to notice the bodies, bent backs, dusty hair, hands roughened by reeds, bricks, rope, and grain. The city may belong to its god, and the king may speak under divine approval, but the daily weight rests on human shoulders. Someone must cut the reeds. Someone must drag the clay. Someone must carry water, thresh barley, weave wool, bake bread, clean courtyards, and repair walls after the rain. Civilization has a stomach. It also has a spine. In Sumerian creation traditions, humanity is not always introduced as a triumphant crown of the universe. In several Mesopotamian myths preserved in later copies, humans are made to take up labour connected with the divine order. The gods need relief from work. Humans enter the story as servants, burden bearers, and caretakers of the sacred economy. That is not exactly flattering. It is, however, deeply revealing. A mainstream historical fact stands behind the mythic language. Early Mesopotamian cities depended on organized labor, irrigation, crop storage, textile production, and temple administration. Archaeologists and historians connected with institutions such as Chicago, Yale and Oxford have studied ration tablets, seal impressions, and building remains that show large systems of work. The myths imagine labour from above. The archives show labour on the ground. You stand near a canal where water slides slowly between cut banks. The sun glitters on the surface, but the mud beneath is thick and stubborn. Men push tools into the wet earth. Women carry bundles of reeds. Animals strain against harnesses. The land is fertile only because people negotiate with it daily. The rivers are generous, but just not polite. Fields must be levelled. Ditches must be cleared. Floodwater must be guided. Salt can rise in the soil and threaten the crops. Grain must be counted, stored, issued, and defended from rot, theft, hunger, and politics. The city is not a miracle that happens once. It is a miracle that must be maintained every season, which is honestly rather inconsiderate of miracles. You hear the myth differently now. When a story says humans were created to work for the gods, it is not only explaining where people came from, it is explaining why life feels heavy. It gives cosmic meaning to aching shoulders and endless duties. It tells the worker that labour is not accidental misery. It is part of the structure of the world. Comforting, perhaps convenient, definitely. Yet the story is not simple cruelty. In these traditions, human service maintains relationship. Offerings feed the gods. Rituals sustain order. Temples bind heaven and earth. And human activity keeps the sacred household functioning. The work is lowly, but essential. Without humans, the divine order lacks its earthly hands. That is a strange kind of importance. You walk through a workyard behind the temple. The ground is scattered with chaff. Loom weights sit near a wall. A woman twists wool between practiced fingers. A man marks a tally beside jars of barley. The activity looks ordinary, but in Sumerian thought, ordinary labour can belong to a larger religious arrangement. A jar is not just a jar. It is an offering, a ration, a record, a duty, a promise. The quirky tidbit is that some ancient Mesopotamian texts complain about noise made by humans. In later flood traditions, human clamour disturbs the divine realm so badly that the gods consider drastic answers. This is wonderfully awkward. Humanity is created to do the work, then apparently becomes too loud while doing it. Even heaven, it seems, develops neighbour complaints. You can almost hear the divine sigh. But beneath the dark humour lies a profound anxiety. Humans are useful, yet troublesome. Necessary, yet fragile. Created for service, yet full of desire, fear, cleverness, fatigue, hunger, grief, and ambition. The gods may order the system, but human beings must live inside it with bodies that ache and minds that wander. This tension appears again and again. Sumerian literature often presents humans as dependent on divine favour, yet capable of astonishing skill. They build cities, compose hymns, organise trade, and produce art of remarkable delicacy. Cylinder seals show banquets, animals, rituals, heroes, and divine scenes in miniature. The hand that serves also imagines. The back that bends also belongs to a mind that remembers. A human being is not only a tool. The texts never let the matter become comfortable. Open scholarly debate continues over how creation stories should be interpreted in relation to actual social life. Some researchers see them as theological explanations for labour and hierarchy. Others emphasise their ritual context, where myths legitimise offerings and temple service. Another line of study asks how ordinary workers may have understood such ideas, especially when most written texts were produced by trained elites. That last question is difficult. The tablets mostly preserve the voices of administrators, scribes, priests, and royal institutions. The potter's private complaint, the canal worker's muttered joke, and the field labourer's tired thought rarely survive in neat columns. Clay remembers systems better than size. History often does that, which is rude, but not surprising, so you must listen carefully at the edges. A ration tablet tells you someone worked. A seal impression tells you goods moved under authority. A myth tells you labor had cosmic explanation. A broken bowl tells you food was eaten. A worn threshold tells you feet crossed the same doorway thousands of times. Together they form a quieter human record. You feel the rough wood of a basket handle beneath your imagined fingers. It bites into the skin. The load is not symbolic when carried by a body. Grain has weight. Mud has weight. Bricks have weight. Water has weight. Even prayer has weight when repeated every day beside hunger and uncertainty. Perhaps this is why the Sumerian vision is so haunting. It does not place humanity at the beginning. It places humanity within a task. People are made, assigned, watched, and needed. Their purpose is not freedom in the modern sense. Their purpose is participation in a world already structured by greater powers. There is dignity in that. There is confinement too. The city grows because countless hands accept, resist, endure, and repeat their roles. The temple receives because fields produce. The gods are honored because humans prepare the offerings. The king stands tall because others build the platform beneath him. In this ancient arrangement, power looks upward, but labor moves everywhere underneath. The afternoon heat thickens. Dust sticks to damp skin. The canal smells green and heavy. A clay tablet dries near the doorway, recording rations for workers whose names may be lost, shortened, or reduced to categories. Yet each person once had a face, a voice, a sleeping place, a private worry under the night. You begin to understand the unsettling beauty of the creation stories. They answer the question of human origin through work, not romance. They say that life is service before it is glory. They suggest that human beings were shaped to carry what the gods no longer wish to carry themselves. But perhaps the deeper mystery is not why humans were made to work. Perhaps it is why, after being placed so low in the order, humans became the ones who preserved the story. Not the gods, not the kings alone, the scribes, the labor systems, the schools, the tired hands pressing signs into clay. Human beings recorded the claim that they were servants, and by recording it, they outlived the temples that defined them. The basket is lowered. The stylus presses again. A worker vanishes from sight, but a ration remains. A myth crosses centuries. A city collapses. Yet its explanation of human purpose survives in cracked tablets, waiting for you to read it in a darkened room. And the question remains soft, patient, and uneasy. Were humans created to serve civilization? Or did civilization create stories to explain why humans must serve? The ground beneath your feet becomes the story now, not the tablet, not the temple song, not the king's proud inscription. You're standing on a mound that does not look especially grand in the fading light. It rises gently from the plain, dusty and uneven, with scraps of pottery pressed into its sides like small teeth. This is how ancient cities sleep, not as shining ruins at first, but as low hills made from collapsed walls, abandoned houses, wind-blown earth, broken ovens, ashes, floors, graves, and the slow forgetting of streets. One generation builds on the remains of another. A room becomes rubble. Rubble becomes foundation. A courtyard disappears under a new courtyard. Time stacks itself in clay. You look down, and the city is under you. Layer below layer, lives have settled into silence. Archaeologists call such mounds tells, formed by a long occupation in the same place. In southern Mesopotamia, sites such as Eridu, Uruk, Nippur, and Ur preserve deep sequences of settlement, rebuilding, abandonment, and return. Excavations by major research teams, including those connected with American and European institutions, have shown how cities were not born fully formed. They accumulated through centuries of experiment. That fact matters, because the Sumerian texts sometimes speak as though sacred order arrives suddenly, descending from heaven or established by gods. Archaeology tells a slower story. Mud brick architecture, pottery styles, irrigation practices, administrative seals, and early writing develop over long stretches of time. Civilization appears less like a lightning strike and more like a lamp being trimmed again and again. Still, the two stories do not cancel each other. They create tension. You walk across the mound at dusk and your sandals scrape over sherds warmed by the day. The air smells of dust, dry grass, and faint salt. In the distance, a canal glimmers like a dark ribbon. The horizon is wide and low, making the sky feel enormous. It is easy here to imagine memory spreading outward, then sinking down into earth. Eridu is especially haunting in this landscape. Ancient tradition remembered it as a city of deep beginnings, associated with the god Enki and with wisdom rising from the watery depths. Archaeology shows that Eridu had long occupation layers and early temple structures, rebuilt repeatedly over time. The sacred place did not remain fixed because nothing changed. It remained sacred because people kept rebuilding. That is a powerful kind of memory. A wall falls, and another wall follows its line. A platform erodes, and another platform rises above it. A shrine changes shape, yet the place continues to matter. The quirky tidbit is that ancient Mesopotamian builders often reused older bricks, older spaces, and older sacred alignments. One might say they were recycling before anyone made it socially impressive. A broken past was not always cleared away completely. Sometimes it was folded into the next building. Practical and symbolic at once. Very efficient, very mysterious. You crouch near an exposed trench. In your imagination, its sides reveal stripes of time, ash, floor, fill, brick, debris, plaster, sand, and another floor. A burned layer appears like a dark breath trapped between centuries. A jar fragment rests at an angle. A drain cuts through older material. Someone once repaired something badly. Because ancient maintenance workers were also human, the trench is a narrow window. It does not show the whole city, only a wound through which time becomes visible. Yet even that wound is enough. It reveals that beneath the Sumerian world of writing lay earlier communities, older habits, and long experiments with settlement. Farmers, fishers, herders, craftsmen, and temple builders shaped these places before the text could explain them. Long before recorded history, hands were already arranging earth. In a time that is no longer remembered, people were already making choices that later scribes would place under divine names. This is where the hidden timeline becomes delicate. It is tempting to imagine a lost civilization buried beneath Sumer, complete with vanished science, secret rulers, and forbidden knowledge. Tempting, yes. But temptation is not evidence, and clay is not improved by shouting at it. The better mystery is quieter. The better mystery asks how human memory transforms slow development into sacred origin. A temple rebuilt for centuries may become, in story, a first temple. A city with deep occupation may become the first city. A tradition carried through generations may harden into the claim that order began there, before the ordinary world became fully ordinary. That is not fraud. It is how memory grows roots. A mainstream historical fact helps steady the scene. Excavations at Uruk show evidence for major urban expansion, monumental buildings, mass-produced pottery, seal use, and administrative complexity during the late 4th millennium before Christ. Researchers in ancient Near Eastern studies often view Uruk as central to understanding early urbanism, yet Uruk itself grew from earlier regional developments, not from emptiness. The city had ancestors. Every city does. You walk through an imagined early settlement before writing has found its full voice. The houses are smaller. The streets are less formal. The temple platform is modest compared with the later forms. People work with fish nets, baskets, clay vessels, and reed mats. The marsh is near, alive with birds and insects. Water buffalo may move through the wetlands in later periods, heavy and serene, looking as though they know the secrets but consider humans too excitable to tell. The air is thick with plant smell. Here, The world is not yet the Sumer of famous tablets. It is the ground from which that world will rise. The people do not know they are preparing a civilization for future scholars. They are solving immediate problems: food, water, shelter, exchange, ritual, birth, death, the unbearable simplicity of survival. And yet, in solving these problems, they build patterns. Patterns become institutions. Institutions become myths. Open scholarly debate continues over the relationship between archaeology and later Sumerian tradition. Some specialists argue that memories of genuinely ancient cult centers may lie behind myths of first cities. Others warn that later scribes could project sacred status backward, giving old places even older prestige. A third view holds both possibilities together, allowing memory and invention to braid around real landscapes. The mound does not answer directly. It prefers layers. You see why that matters? A text can say kingship descended once. A mound says settlement returned many times. A myth can name a god as founder. A trench can show rebuilds, repairs, and gradual change. The human mind wants one origin, one moment, one secret door opening in the dark. The earth offers accumulation. That is slower, but perhaps more honest. The ancient city is not only a place where people lived. It is a machine for storing memory without deciding what memory means. A child's toy, a temple foundation, a burned room, a seal impression, a burial, and a broken tablet may all occupy different depths. Later people may not know what lies beneath their own floors, yet they inherit it physically. They walk on forgotten lives. So do you? The mound cools as evening settles. A faint wind moves over the surface, lifting dust into thin veils. The last light touches pottery fragments, making them glow briefly, then vanish into brown. You feel the age of the place not as an umber, but as pressure. Down there are houses under houses, thresholds under thresholds, meals under meals, prayers under prayers. This is the hidden timeline beneath the written one, not a single lost empire waiting to be named, but a depth of human persistence that the tablets only partly illuminate. The Sumerians wrote beginnings, but the ground kept older beginnings beneath them. The texts speak of descent from heaven. The mound speaks of ascent from mud, reed, labour, and memory. Perhaps both were true in different languages. Perhaps people built upward for so long that the result felt given from above. Night gathers over the old settlement. The trench darkens first, becoming a black line cut into the hill. Somewhere beyond it, the river continues its slow work, carrying silt, reeds, and reflections of stars. The mound remains still, but it is not empty. It is crowded with vanished rooms. You stand above them, listening. No voice rises from below. No dramatic revelation breaks the quiet. Only the layered earth remains, patient and unreadable, holding the older shadows under Sumer's first cities. The light narrows to the surface of a broken tablet, and the world becomes a puzzle of missing edges. You're not looking at a complete story. You're looking at damage. A corner is gone. A column has been scraped away. A line begins with confidence, then falls into silence where the clay has snapped. This is one of the oldest feelings in history, not discovery, interruption. The Sumerian myths that survive often reach us in fragments, copied on tablets that were already part of long scribal traditions. A beginning may be missing. A god's name may be damaged. A verb may survive without its object, leaving scholars to lean over one sign like listeners at a locked door. The result is not only uncertainty, it is atmosphere. You feel that atmosphere now. The room smells of dust, dry clay, and a lamp smoke. A scholar's hand turns a fragment carefully, as though the smallest pressure might disturb 5,000 years of waiting. The tablet is not large. It could vanish under a folded cloth. Yet on its cracked face, a creation, a quarrel, a journey, or a divine command may have once unfolded. A mainstream historical fact steadies the moment. Many Sumerian literary works are known from old Babylonian school copies, often dating centuries later than the earlier Sumerian city-states. Institutions such as the University of Pennsylvania, Yale, Oxford, and Chicago have helped preserve, edit, and interpret these texts. Their study depends on careful comparison, not dramatic guesswork. And still, the gaps matter. A fragment is honest in a way a complete text is not. It shows you exactly where knowledge breaks. It refuses to flatter you. It does not pretend the past has been recovered neatly, polished like a museum floor. Instead, it gives you a few surviving lines and lets the darkness remain visible around them. You read a mythic scene. A god speaks. A city is named. A command seems to be given. Then the clay is missing. When the text resumes, something has already happened. A decision has been made somewhere in the lost space. A destiny has shifted. You are left with the strange sensation of arriving late to the oldest conversation in the room. That is how Sumer often speaks. Not in perfect scrolls, but in broken openings. Some stories concern divine assemblies, where the gods deliberate and assign powers. Some tell of journeys between heaven, earth, and the underworld. Some describe the ordering of cities, crafts, kingship, and sacred offices. Some preserve laments for destroyed places, where gods abandon temples and the streets fill with grief. The range is vast, but the condition is fragile. Clay survives as not always kindly. Fire can preserve a tablet by hardening it, yet fire can also shatter it. Water can soften clay back toward mud. Salt can damage surfaces. Excavation can expose what burial protected. Even modern handling, before careful conservation practices improved, could add harm to ancient injury. The archive is durable, yes, but never invincible. The quirky tidbit is that some tablets were not grand library treasures at all. They were school exercises, copied by students learning classic compositions. A myth may survive because a tired student practiced it badly. Somewhere, a bored apprentice helped save a sacred story while probably wishing for dinner. History has a dry sense of humour. You lean closer to the signs, and the marks begin to seem like breaths. Each wedge is a decision. Some are deep and confident. Others are shallow. A few are crowded near the edge, where the scribe misjudged the space and squeezed the final signs. The hand behind the writing is gone, but the small struggle remains. Even divine stories pass through human inconvenience. The tablet's damage raises a quiet question. What happens to a myth when its beginning is lost? A modern reader wants origin, explanation, sequence. First this happened, then that happened, and finally the world made sense. But an ancient fragment rarely behaves so politely. It may begin in the middle of a divine problem, where the gods already know things you do not. That uncertainty can be irritating. It can also be beautiful, because missing beginnings force you to notice how much every culture assumes before it speaks. The Sumerian scribe does not always explain who every god is, why a city matters, or why a ritual office carries weight. The audience may have known. The school may have taught it. The temple may have performed it. The story floats on a sea of shared knowledge now mostly drained away. You hold only the boat plank. Open scholarly debate continues over how much lost oral tradition stands behind the written myths. Some specialists argue that many compositions reflect long performance traditions, shaped before they were copied in schools. Others emphasize the creative role of scribal education, where older material could be arranged, standardized, or reinterpreted. The surviving tablet may therefore be both memory and classroom product. That mixture complicates everything. Imagine a singer in an earlier city chanting a tale before listeners who know the divine names by heart. Imagine that tale changing slightly with each performance, adapting to ritual, place, and audience. Later, imagine a school tablet fixing one version into clay. Later still, imagine that clay breaking. What reaches you is not the living river. It is a cup of water from a riverbed. Still, the water is real. You move through the myths by fragments of meaning. A goddess descends. A god creates order. A city receives destiny, a flood gathers, a hero listens, a temple laments, a divine plan is hidden, revealed, lost, or misheard. Again and again, you sense a larger structure just beyond the surviving lines. The old stories do not feel random, they feel interrupted. This is where the mystery becomes sharper. If the tablets are broken, then the mystery is partly physical. We do not have all the pieces. Yet if the stories themselves speak in layered symbols, then even complete tablets would not remove all uncertainty. Ancient myth is not a code waiting for one modern key. It is a room of echoes, and each echo belongs to a different ritual, political, and emotional world. A damaged line may hide a simple word. It may also hide the turn that changes everything. You see a scholar reconstructing a phrase from parallel texts. One version preserves 3 signs, another preserves the ending of a word. A later translation hints at a similar sentence. Slowly, cautiously, a reading emerges, not a wild leap, but an educated restoration. Even then, brackets remain around the missing parts, a little fence built around uncertainty. Those brackets are important. They are humility made visible. There is something soothing in that humility. The tablet does not ask you to conquer it. It asks you to sit with incompletion. In a world that loves clean answers, Sumer offers broken clay and says gently, not everything that matters arrives whole. The evening deepens around the archive table. A lamp flickers. Shadows fill the cracks in the tablet, making the damage look darker than the clay itself. The missing spaces almost become characters in the story. They speak by refusing to speak. Perhaps that is why the oldest myths feel slightly unsettling. They do not merely tell of forgotten beginnings. They show you how beginnings can be lost. They make you aware that human memory is not a straight road from past to present. It is a field of fragments, some buried, some broken, some copied by sleepy students, some preserved by accident, and some gone beyond all recovery. Yet enough remains, enough to see gods assigning order, enough to hear cities treated as sacred creations, enough to sense that humans entered a world already full of rules, offices, powers, and dangers. Enough to understand that the Sumerian imagination did not begin with emptiness. It began with arrangement, conflict, and responsibility. The tablet rests again. Its broken edge catches the low light. You do not know what words once stood there. No one does with certainty. But the missing clay does not feel empty. It feels like a doorway sealed by time, a place where the story continues without allowing you to follow. You breathe slowly. The fragment says what it can. The silence says the rest. Your attention settles on numbers, those quiet little creatures that appear so harmless until they begin misbehaving. They sit on tablets beside grain, sheep, jars, and workers, calm and obedient. Then they appear in royal lists, cosmic patterns, and sacred calculations, and suddenly they stretch beyond comfort. A number can count bread. A number can also disturb sleep. You're in a scribal room again, but now the air feels sharper, filled with the dry scent of clay dust and unread shavings. A teacher recites values, a student repeats them, pressing wedges in careful rows. Outside, the city continues with its ordinary problems, but inside this room, the world is being measured, divided, multiplied, and made legible. The Sumerians and later Mesopotamian scribes used a sexagesimal system based around 60. This mathematical tradition became one of Mesopotamia's most enduring gifts to later cultures. Its influence still lingers in 60 minutes, 60 seconds, and the 360 degrees of a circle. Researchers at universities such as Yale, Chicago, and Oxford have long studied mathematical tablets that reveal remarkable skill in calculation, measurement, and numerical reasoning. That is the steady fact. The strange part begins when number leaves the market and enters myth. In the ancient king lists, reigns before the flood extend into vast durations. Some totals are so enormous that they seem to belong less to human biography than to sacred architecture. A reign is not merely long, it becomes monumental, like a temple built from years instead of bricks. The number itself becomes a wall, keeping ordinary time outside. You see a scribe copying such a figure. His stylus moves across the wet clay with practiced confidence. He does not gasp. He does not scribble a question mark in the margin, though frankly that would have been helpful. The enormous reign sits there calmly, as if every trained reader should know what kind of time is being described. This confidence is the unsettling part. Modern minds often rush toward two easy answers. Either the numbers are literal, which creates impossible kings who outlive landscapes, or they are meaningless exaggeration, which makes them less interesting than they deserve. Sumerian number, however, rarely rewards impatience. It belongs to accounting, astronomy, metrology, ritual, education, and power. It can be practical and symbolic without apologizing for either. The clay does not choose your categories for you. You walk mentally through the city, and numbers follow everywhere. Measures of barley are issued to workers. Land is divided. Bricks are counted. Offerings are recorded. The temple tracks animals, textiles, oil, beer, and labor. Without number, the city becomes confusion with walls around it. But number also rises upward. It marks ritual calendars. It organizes festivals. It structures lists of gods, rulers, places, and powers. It gives weight to statements that must sound ancient, stable, and sanctioned. A large number can say more than quantity. It can say greatness. It can say distance. It can say, do not treat this as ordinary. The quirky tidbit is that Mesopotamian mathematics could be astonishingly clever, while still being written on something you might mistake for a dry biscuit. Some school tablets contain problem sets, tables, and calculations that show disciplined training. Imagine inventing serious mathematics, then storing the homework in mud. Humanity is magnificent and ridiculous. You hear the student mutter softly. The teacher corrects him. A wedge goes too deep. Another sign is smoothed away. The lesson continues because the city needs people who can manage quantities without letting the temple granary descend into chaos. A trained scribe knows that number is not decoration. Number is authority pressed into clay, yet the huge mythic numbers are not granary records. They behave differently. They create distance between the listener and the beginning of time. They make the pre-flood world feel vast, heavy, and nearly unreachable. By giving early kings reigns beyond normal life, the tradition separates primordial authority from the ordinary politics of later rulers. Long before recorded history on kingship is not merely old, it is immeasurably old. In a time that is no longer remembered, time itself seems larger. Open scholarly debate continues over how to interpret those extraordinary reigns. Some specialists see symbolic use of the sexagesimal system, where large rounded values express sacred magnitude. Others connect the numbers with a political theology, suggesting they magnified early kingship to strengthen later claims. A more cautious interpretation holds that traditional memory, mathematical patterning, and religious imagination may all be working together. That blended answer may be less dramatic. It may also be closer to the clay. You turn toward the sky over the marshes, because numbers are not trapped indoors. The horizon is wide, and the stars appear with startling clarity once the dust settles and the cooking fires dim. Ancient observers watched lunar cycles, seasonal changes, planetary movements, and omens in the heavens. Later, Mesopotamian astronomy would become highly sophisticated, but its roots belong to a world where sky and city were never fully separate. A star was not only light, it could be timing, warning, god, pattern, and sign. The same mind that counts barley may also count days until a festival. The same system that measures fields may measure the arc of heaven. The same cultural habit that organizes labor may organize cosmic meaning. Number becomes a bridge between mud and sky, Perhaps that is why the enormous reigns feel so alive. They do not simply exaggerate rulers, they place rulers into a measured universe. The kings belong to a sequence. The sequence belongs to a sacred pattern. The pattern survives because scribes copy it, and copying turns memory into discipline. There is power in repetition. A number repeated across generations becomes more than data. It becomes tradition. It gains the weight of being inherited. Even when scribes alter, adapt, or reorganize material, the act of copying announces that the old structure still matters. You imagine a royal audience hearing such numbers recited. The listeners do not need to calculate every year in modern fashion. They need to feel the scale. They need to sense that authority reaches backward into an age too large for private memory. A ruler standing in that lineage is no longer just a local strongman with soldiers and excellent self-esteem. He is a temporary holder of something ancient. The numbers make him small and important together. That is a clever effect. They magnify kingship while humbling individual kings. One city holds power, then loses it. One ruler reigns, then becomes a name. Even the impossible durations finally end. The list moves on. Time devours everything, including the rulers who seem too vast for time. The tablet understands irony. You feel the cool night air now. Somewhere nearby, water laps against reeds. The stars tremble in the river, broken by slow movement. A scribe could look upward and see order. He could look down at the tablet and make another order with his hands. Heaven and clay mirror each other. Not perfectly, but suggestively. The hidden system begins to appear. Numbers arrange labour. Numbers arrange reigns. Numbers arrange sacred calendars. Numbers arrange cosmic attention. They do not reveal one single secret, but they show a civilization deeply invested in pattern. The world is not random if it can be counted. The past is not lost if it can be listed. The divine order is not invisible if its rhythms can be marked. Still, the mystery remains. Were the vast numbers meant to conceal history, magnify it, ritualize it, or translate it into a language of sacred scale? Did ancient listeners hear absurdity, reverence, memory, or all three at once? The answer may have shifted from schoolroom to court, from temple to household, from one century to another. A number does not always mean one thing. The clay tablet sits in the dimness, its signs small and fixed. You look at the marks and feel the strange calm of a system that has outlived its users. Tens, 60s, hundreds, thousands. Human minds placing fences around the infinite, then discovering that the infinite leaks quietly through. The student finishes his row. The teacher nods, perhaps grudgingly. Outside, the city sleeps under measured stars. Inside, the impossible rains continue their silent work, stretching the beginning of civilization into a distance so vast it can only be approached through number. And perhaps that was always the point. The sound reaches you before the image does. A low movement beyond the reed beds, almost too distant to name. At first it might be wind, then it becomes heavier. Water touches banks it should not touch. Mud softens underfoot. The river seems to breathe with a larger body swelling in the dark. Flood memory begins like this, not as a legend, not as a tablet, not as a famous story passed through libraries, but as a change in the smell of the air, wet earth, rotting reeds, animal fear, smoke from hurried fires, the sudden silence of people listening to water rise where water is not welcome. In southern Mesopotamia, rivers made life possible and dangerous at once. The Tigris and Euphrates carried silt, filled canals, nourished fields, and connected cities through trade and travel. They also flooded unpredictably, damaged settlements, shifted channels, and left communities vulnerable to water that could turn fertile land into ruin. That is the mainstream fact beneath the sacred memory. Archaeology has found flood deposits at several Mesopotamian sites, though not one single layer that neatly explains every later flood tradition. Scholars connected with institutions such as Chicago, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied these deposits carefully. The evidence suggests local and regional flooding events, not a simple universal catastrophe that can be pinned to one date. Still, mud remembers in its own language. You stand in an ancient street as rain clouds gather far beyond sight. The houses are low, built of mud brick with reed mats, storage jars, tools, and sleeping places inside. A family has stacked goods on a raised surface. Someone has tied animals closer to the wall. Someone has looked toward the canal too many times in one afternoon. There is no thunder yet. That makes it worse. Flood stories in Mesopotamian tradition carry the feeling of interruption. The world is ordered, then water erases boundaries. Fields vanish beneath brown currents. Walls weaken. Graves are disturbed. Storehouses fail. The city, which had seemed permanent from inside itself, becomes temporary again. Water is the great editor. It removes, rearranges, and leaves silt over the sentence. In Sumerian flood tradition, preserved in fragmentary form and echoed in later Akkadian stories, a chosen survivor receives warning of destruction and preserves life through a vessel. Names and details shift across texts, but the pattern remains powerful. Divine decision, human warning, rising water, survival, sacrifice, and a changed relationship with the gods. You can feel why the story endured. A flood is not only a natural event, it is an argument with meaning. Why did this happen? Who knew who was spared what was lost? Did the gods turn away? Or did they warn someone in secret? Was the disaster punishment, reset, accident, or mystery beyond human hearing? The quirky tidbit is that in some later versions of the Mesopotamian flood story, the gods themselves become frightened by the flood they unleashed. They gather in distress, hungry for offerings once the waters subside. It is a wonderfully strange reversal. The powers who overwhelm the world still depend on human ritual afterward. Even divine plans have awkward consequences. You imagine floodwater filling a courtyard. A jar tips and rolls. A wooden door strains. Grain dissolves into useless paste. A goat cries from somewhere unseen. The water does not care about status. It enters the house of the poor and the storehouse of the temple with the same cold confidence. Yet status returns when the waters fall. Someone must rebuild. Someone must account for losses. Someone must interpret the disaster. Priests, rulers, scribes, and elders all have roles in turning chaos into memory. A flood is experienced by bodies, then shaped by institutions. It becomes prayer, warning, myth, and archive. This is where the hidden timeline appears again, softly. In the kingly traditions, the flood divides time. Before it, reigns are immense and remote. After it, kingship resumes in a changed world. The flood does not erase order forever. It interrupts order, then confirms that order can descend again. Destruction becomes part of the structure. That is not a cheerful idea. It is a durable one. Open scholarly debate continues over the relationship between Mesopotamian flood myths and actual flood events. Some researchers emphasize the environmental reality of river flooding and settlement disruption. Others focus on literary transmission, comparing Sumerian, Akkadian, and later traditions. Another view suggests that repeated floods, remembered collectively, may have fused into a single sacred catastrophe. A single flood is easier to tell. Many floods may be closer to life. You walk along the edge of a receding inundation. The mud pulls at your feet. Broken reeds lie flat in tangled mats. A dead fish glints near a wall. The air smells of silt and spoiled grain. People move slowly through the damage, searching for tools, animals, stored food, familiar objects, anything that says the world before the water was real. This is the silence after survival. Not peace, not yet. Survival has its own burden. The survivor must explain why he remains. The family must rebuild where absence has become visible. The city must restore walls, canals, shrines, fields, and trust. In a sacred society, practical repair and ritual repair belong together. A cleared canal is one kind of healing, an offering is another. The flood tradition gives disaster a narrative shape. That shape does not remove grief, but it prevents chaos from being meaningless. It says the waters came within a divine order, even if that order is frightening. It says warning was possible, obedience mattered, and life passed through destruction into continuation. A modern reader may doubt the literal frame, but doubt does not empty the story. The story preserves a human truth older than writing. Communities living beside powerful rivers must remember danger. They must teach it. They must place it into forms that travel better than individual fear. A myth can carry survival instructions inside sacred language. Listen, prepare, respect water. Do not assume the city is permanent. The river is older than the wall. The river may not be impressed. You pause beside a temple platform, imagining flood marks staining the lower courses of brick. Workers scrape mud from steps. Priests restore vessels. Scribes record losses and deliveries. Children watch adults behave with forced calm, which is how children learn that the world can break without ending. Somewhere a story begins. At first, perhaps it is told by a hearth, then by a singer, then by a scribe. Names shift. Gods take clearer roles. The flood becomes not merely what happened to us, but what happened to the world. Local memory rises into cosmic history. That enlargement is not deception. It is grief becoming architecture. The Mesopotamian flood stories later echo through wider traditions, carried, adapted, and transformed across cultures. Yet in their Sumerian and Babylonian settings, they remain tied to mud brick cities, river plains, divine assemblies, and the fragile confidence of human labour. They are not abstract tales of water. They are stories born in landscapes where water could bless and erase with the same hand. The flood leaves mud, the tablet leaves memory. Together, they create a strangely intimate form of time. You can dig a flood layer from the ground. You can read a flood story from clay. Neither gives the whole truth alone. The layer lacks voices. The story reshapes events. But between them, you sense a civilization teaching itself how to survive the knowledge that everything built from mud can return to mud. The night settles over the wet plain. Frogs begin calling from the dark water. The river, calmer now, reflects a few early stars. A broken wall stands half dissolved, its bricks softened at the edges. Someone has placed a small offering near a doorway, perhaps in gratitude, perhaps in fear. Perhaps because humans often do both at once. You listen to the water moving. It no longer roars. It whispers along the bank, carrying silt, reeds, memory, and warning. In that whisper, the old tablets seem less like fantasy and more like vessels themselves, carrying fragments of disaster across the flood of time. The mystery is not whether ancient people knew water could destroy. Of course they knew. The mystery is how they turn that knowledge into a sacred dividing line, a hidden seam between one age and another, where the world before the flood sinks beneath silence, and the world after it begins again in clay. Above the reed marshes, the night opens like a dark bowl, immense and strangely clear. The heat of the day has lifted from the mud brick walls. Cooking fires shrink to red points. The last voices fade inside courtyards, and the city turns its face upward without needing to be told. The sky is not decoration here, it is a text without clay. You stand near the edge of a canal, where reeds lean together and insects move in the warm dark. The water carries narrow reflections of stars, trembling each time a fish disturbs the surface. Somewhere behind you, a scribe's room still holds the smell of dry tablets and old lamp smoke. But here, outside, the heavens seem wider than any archive. Ancient Mesopotamian observers watch the sky with serious attention. Over many centuries, the scribes recorded lunar cycles, planetary movements, eclipses, weather signs, and omens. Later Babylonian astronomy became one of the most sophisticated traditions of the ancient world. Scholars at institutions such as Yale, Chicago, and Oxford have studied astronomical tablets that reveal patient observation, calculation, and inherited methods. The roots of that habit reach deep. A farmer cares about seasons, a priest cares about festival timing, a ruler cares about omens, a scribe cares about pattern. The sky gathers all these concerns into one enormous ceiling, where light appears, disappears, returns, and occasionally behaves in ways that make human beings hold their breath. The moon is especially commanding. It grows, thins, vanishes, and returns with quiet discipline. Its changing shape can mark time in a world where calendars must serve planting, ritual, labor, and authority. A city that cannot keep time becomes confused in very practical ways. Offerings arrive late, festivals drift, contracts suffer, workers complain, which, to be fair, workers have earned the right to do. The stars bring another kind of order. They rise in familiar patterns across the year, small fires fixed in the dark, or seemingly fixed to ancient eyes. Planets are stranger. They wander, they pause, reverse, brighten, and slip away. To a culture trained to read meaning in repeated signs, wandering lights are not casual ornaments. They are messengers with suspicious habits. You look upward and feel how natural that thought becomes. There is no electric glow, no city haze hides the sky. The heavens press close, thick with points of light. The air smells of wet reeds, ash, and distant animals. A heron calls from the marsh, harsh and lonely. The sound vanishes beneath the stars. A mainstream historical fact rests quietly here. Mesopotamian scribes eventually developed systematic astronomical records, including observations that helped predict lunar phenomena. Their work influenced later Greek astronomy and, through long chains of transmission, wider scientific traditions. The achievement was not sudden. It grew from generations of watching, recording, comparing, and teaching. Yet the Sumerian world does not separate observation from meaning. A darkened moon can be a celestial event, but also a warning. A strange star can be noted, feared, interpreted, and placed within a system of divine communication. The heavens are not mute. They are part of the same ordered universe that gives kingship, marks festivals, and troubles the dreams of rulers. The quirky tidbit is that later Mesopotamian omen collections could connect heavenly events with very earthly outcomes. A lunar eclipse might warn of danger to a king, a city, or a land. Imagine looking up at the moon and realizing the night sky has become an administrative memo from the universe. Rather dramatic, but admittedly memorable. You can almost hear the royal court reacting. The king does not merely ask what happened. He asks what it means. Priests, diviners, and scholars gather around the event with trained seriousness. The sky becomes evidence. The tablet becomes response. The heavens speak, and the court answers with ritual, interpretation, and sometimes political anxiety wrapped in expensive clothing. This is not foolishness in its own world. It is an attempt to live inside pattern. When survival depends on forces larger than human control, pattern becomes mercy. Rivers flood, crops fail, enemies march, children fall ill, kings die. If signs can be read, then disaster may not arrive completely unseen. An omen does not eliminate fear, but it gives fear a grammar. That grammar is written in stars. You imagine a young scribe learning celestial lists. He copies names of heavenly bodies, months, signs, and explanations. His teacher corrects the shape of his wedges. Outside, the moon rises without concern for the lesson. Inside, the student learns that knowledge is not merely seeing. It is seeing according to inherited order. This is where sky law becomes power. Most people can look up. Not everyone can interpret. The trained reader of signs stands between heaven and city, turning brightness into warning, timing, or reassurance, like temple ritual and royal inscription. Celestial knowledge belongs to a world where information is sacred because it is controlled. Open scholarly debate continues over how early Sumerian star knowledge should be separated from later Babylonian astronomy. Some specialists emphasize continuity, seeing old religious and calendrical habits beneath later technical systems. Others warn that the surviving astronomical evidence is much richer from later periods, making early reconstruction uncertain. A balanced view allows deep roots without pretending every later achievement already existed at the beginning. The stars invite exaggeration. Good scholarship resists politely. Still, it is impossible to deny the ancient fascination. Seals, hymns, divine symbols, calendars, and later scholarly texts all suggest a culture where heaven and earth corresponded. The sky did not float above history. It participated in history, a king's fate, a city's danger, a harvest's timing, and a god's favour could all be imagined beneath celestial order. You walk farther into the marsh edge. The mud is cool now. Reeds brush your arms. Tiny creatures stir in the water, and the air hums with insects. The city behind you is dark, except for a few lamps near sacred buildings. Above, the stars appear almost sharp enough to cut the silence. It is easy, under such a sky, to believe that nothing moves without meaning. Perhaps that belief is not so distant from modern life. You still search for patterns when events become frightening. You still ask whether timing matters. You still wonder whether scattered signs belong to a story you have not understood yet. The ancient scribe has a stylus. You have different instruments. The hunger beneath them is not entirely different. You want the world to answer. The Sumerians placed that desire inside a sacred universe. Heaven was high, but not disconnected. Earth was low, but not abandoned. Between them moved signs, dreams, omens, festivals, and numbers. The same civilization that counted sheep also watched stars. The same hands that recorded barley could preserve celestial warnings. Mud and heaven belong together. That pairing is the quiet wonder. You think of a tablet lying under lamplight, covered with signs about the sky. It is almost absurd. A piece of earth is carrying the memory of heaven. Clay, pressed by a human hand, records the movements of lights no hand can reach. The smallest surface holds the widest distance. There is humility in that image. There is also ambition. The hidden system becomes clearer as the night deepens. Cities are assigned to gods. Humans are assigned to work. Kingship is assigned through sacred descent. Time is divided by flood, rain, season, month, and omen. The stars complete the structure, making the sky itself part of the arrangement. Nothing is outside the net. Not the river, not the king, not the worker, not the moon moving silently over the marsh. You stand until the air cools further and the first heaviness of sleep touches the edges of thought. The city breathes behind you. The canal carries broken stars. Somewhere, a scribe has left a tablet drying beside a lamp, and tomorrow another sign will be copied, another pattern preserved. The heavens continue without sound, yet in the ancient mind they are never silent. They watch, measure, warn, and return. Their lights travel above the reed marshes, patient and remote, while below them human beings look upward, trying to understand whether the universe is speaking softly, or whether the silence itself has always been the message. Word count 1150, Section 11. A small room waits behind the noise of the city, and inside it the day has a different weight. The walls are plain. The floor is hard-packed earth. Reed bundles rest near a low surface. Damp clay sits ready for use, wrapped to keep it from drying too soon. The air smells of dust, sweat, lamp smoke, and the faint green sharpness of cut reeds. This is not a palace. It is not a battlefield. Yet power is being made here. You hear the quiet scrape of a styland, come followed by a pause, then another careful pressure into clay. A student sits with shoulders slightly tense. copying signs under the gaze of a teacher who has probably seen every possible mistake and forgiven very few of them. The student's hands are young. The system he is learning is ancient, difficult, and extremely unforgiving. Writing is not natural. It has to be trained into the body. In ancient Mesopotamia, scribal education required years of copying signs, word lists, model texts, mathematical tables, proverbs, hymns, and administrative formulas. School tablets from sites such as Nippur and Ur reveal exercises where students learned both language and discipline. Scholars at major centres of Near Eastern studies have shown that scribes formed a professional class essential to temples, palaces, trade, law, and memory. That is the plain historical fact, but inside the schoolroom, plain facts acquire texture. You can almost feel the student's wrist ache. He presses a wedge too wide, then tries again. He forgets a sign. The teacher notices. Of course the teacher notices. Ancient teachers, like modern ones, had a mystical ability to appear exactly when a student hoped they would not. The room grows warm. Clay dries too quickly if neglected. A tablet must be held, shaped, smoothed, written, and sometimes erased while still soft enough to correct. A mistake can be scraped away, but not always cleanly. The surface remembers pressure, even after smoothing. Learning leaves ghosts under the new line. That is a useful image for Sumerian tradition itself. The scribe copies what came before, but the older pressure remains beneath his hand. He receives lists of signs, names of gods, patterns of kingship, hymns to cities, and stories of creation. He does not invent everything. He inherits. Yet every act of copying is also a small act of selection. A line is preserved. A wording is adjusted. A damaged sign is guessed. A lesson text becomes a sacred survivor. The scribe is a gatekeeper because he controls passage. Speech passes into writing through him. Royal command passes into durable form through him. Goods pass into official accounting through him. Myth passes into school tradition through him. A name can travel beyond death only if someone has learned how to press it properly into clay. That is quiet authority. It rarely wears a crown. A ruler may stand before soldiers, but a scribe decides how the victory is described. A temple may own herds and fields, but scribes track the movement of animals, grain, workers, wool, oil, and offerings. A merchant may swear that he paid already, and the tablet may calmly disagree. Clay has a memory that is difficult to flatter. You move closer to a shelf of school tablets. Some are rough practice pieces, some are carefully ruled, some contain repeated signs, like handwriting drills. Others preserve lists of words in Sumerian, sometimes with equivalents in Akkadian during later periods. The school becomes a place where language itself is arranged, compared, and preserved. The old tongue survives in classrooms. That survival is remarkable. Sumerian eventually stopped being spoken as an everyday language, but it remained a learned language for religion, scholarship, and scribal training. Later students copied Sumerian compositions long after the language had become ancient to them. The result is a civilization preserving another civilization inside its own education. The past becomes homework. A quirky tidbit rests on some school texts that describe the life of students with surprising humour. They complain about strict teachers, punishments, difficult lessons, and the social effort of becoming a proper scribe. One ancient student even sounds as though he understands the universal law of school, which is that learning is noble until someone assigns too much of it. You smile, but softly. The humour matters because it returns living breath to the archive. Scribes were not disembodied minds floating above society. They were boys, men, and perhaps in some settings women, though the evidence varies by place and period. They had families, ambitions, rivalries, hunger, fear, pride, and probably a strong interest in finishing lessons before the evening meal. Their humanity shaped the tablets. A teacher dictates, a student copies. The text is corrected. Another copy is made years later. A fragment survives because it was discarded, buried, burned, or forgotten. The chain is fragile, but it can last longer than bronze, longer than kings, longer than the walls meant to protect the city. You hear the teacher recite a sign list. The rhythm is almost musical. The list does not merely teach writing, it teaches order, plants, animals, stones, professions, cities, gods, vessels, and tools are arranged into categories. The student learns that the world can be divided into named things. To name is to handle, to list is to control, to copy is to join a tradition older than your own breath. This is where knowledge becomes both service and barrier. Most people in the city do not read these tablets. They know the weight of grain, the timing of water, the feel of wool, the ache of labour, and the sound of prayer. But the written form of those experiences belongs largely to specialists. The scribe stands between daily life and official memory. He can preserve the worker, but he can also reduce the worker to a ration entry. That is not evil, it is structural. Open scholarly debate continues over how wide literacy truly was in early Mesopotamian society. Some researchers argue that writing remained mostly in the hands of trained professionals linked to institutions. Others suggest that certain merchants, administrators, and elite households may have held practical levels of literacy. The evidence is uneven, and the answer likely changed across centuries and cities. The gate was not equally open. A person's voice could enter the record through tax, debt, labour, court case, offering, or employment. But the form of that voice was shaped by scribal habit. The tablet might say that barley was issued to a woman, a labourer, a child, or a group. It might not tell you what they feared, desired, remembered, or whispered while walking home. The archive speaks. It also filters. This filtering becomes especially important when reading myths. Sacred stories may feel like windows into the oldest human imagination, and they are. But they are also products of scribal settings. A myth copied in a school may reflect older oral traditions, temple performances, royal ideology, and the educational goals of teachers. It is never merely a story sitting untouched in the wilderness of time. It has passed through trained hands. Those hands leave order. You watch a student prepare a tablet. He kneads the clay and flattens it into a small rectangle. His fingertips leave faint impressions along the sides. He draws a line, then begins. The signs appear one by one, not as decoration, but as controlled memory. Each wedge belongs to a system he did not create and must obey. There is something almost tender in that obedience. A civilization survives because generations accept the burden of exactness. They copy the difficult sign. They preserve the old name. They learn the strange grammar. They repeat hymns whose first singers are gone beyond knowing. They guard a language that daily speech has left behind. The scribe's power is therefore double. He can preserve the hidden timeline, and he can reshape it. He can keep the gods alive in clay, and he can make their voices sound more orderly than any spoken ritual ever did. He can carry kingship across centuries, but he can also make royal claims look inevitable by placing them in polished sequence. The clay does not lie by itself. Humans teach it what to remember. The room is quiet now. The student has finished one side of the tablet. The teacher inspects it, perhaps with approval carefully hidden to avoid encouraging joy too recklessly. Outside, the city continues with animals, traders, children, canals, and temple deliveries. Inside, the past is being trained for survival. You remain near the doorway. The fading light touches the clay, making the fresh signs shine briefly before they dull. A small tablet dries on the floor, carrying words that may be copied again, stored, broken, buried, recovered, and puzzled over by minds the student cannot imagine. The gatekeeper lowers his stylus. The gate stays open, but only narrowly. Word count 1141. Section 12. The earth opens under a brush, not a shovel, and the old city appears one grain at a time. You are standing beside an excavation trench in the hard light of morning, where dust clings to boots and every wall of soil seems to hold a different century. The air smells of dry clay, canvas, sweat, and sun-warmed pottery. Nothing here arrives quickly. A worker kneels with careful hands. A small fragment emerges from packed earth. It might be a tablet corner. It might be a seal impression. It might be nothing more than a broken pot, which is how archaeology enjoys humbling everyone before breakfast. The past does not reveal itself with theatrical generosity. It appears reluctantly, in pieces that must be recorded before they can be understood. You watch the trench supervisor measure a layer. A photographer leans in. A student writes notes. Labels are tied to bags. Soil is screened. Coordinates are marked. The romance of discovery is there, but it is wrapped in discipline, patience, and a surprising amount of dust in uncomfortable places. This is how modern Sumer is rebuilt, not by guessing wildly at shadows, but by setting each fragment into its proper place. A mainstream historical fact grounds this scene. Excavations in Mesopotamia, including work at Nippur, Uruk, Lagash, and other sites, have produced tablets, buildings, graves, tools, seals, pottery, and art that allow scholars to reconstruct early urban life. American institutions, including the University of Pennsylvania and the Oriental Institute at Chicago, played major roles in studying and preserving many Mesopotamian discoveries, yet the evidence does not speak alone. It has to be interpreted. A wall can be measured, but its meaning may remain uncertain. A tablet can be translated, but its context may be damaged. A seal can show a ritual scene, but whether it depicts myth, ceremony, status, or idealized power may be debated for years. Archaeology answers some questions, then quietly opens 3 more under the table. You step closer to the trench edge. The exposed layers look like a cut loaf of time, if the loaf were made from mud brick, ash, broken pottery, and administrative anxiety. At one level, there may be domestic rooms. At another, temple debris. Deeper still, earlier architecture turns at a different angle. A drain crosses through older material, disturbing whatever lay beneath it. The ground is not a library shelf. It is a crowded accident. Objects move. Later builders dig into earlier floors. Floods shift material. Looters damage contexts. Old excavations sometimes removed layers too quickly. Before modern methods could record what they destroyed, even honest discovery can become lost when technique is not careful enough. That is one reason older excavation reports can feel both valuable and frustrating. They found wonders. They also missed details. The quirky tidbit is that some of the most valuable clues are not glittering treasures, but trash, discarded pottery, food remains, ash deposits, broken tools, and humble ceilings often tell more about daily life than spectacular objects. Ancient garbage, it turns out, has an excellent memory, very rude of gold to be so beautiful and often less useful. You kneel near a bag of pottery sherds. Each fragment is ordinary, but its shape, fabric, colour, and decoration may help date a layer. A trained eye sees patterns where others see rubble. One rim belongs to one period. Another handle belongs somewhere else. Pottery becomes a slow calendar, written in broken curves instead of numbers. Nearby, a tablet fragment rests under shade. Its signs are faint. The surface has salt damage. A conservator will clean it carefully, stabilize it, photograph it, and perhaps later a specialist will identify its language, genre, and date. Maybe it is an account, maybe a school exercise, maybe a piece of a myth that changes a footnote somewhere. A footnote can be thrilling. Historians are like that. The modern puzzle is unfinished because Sumer leaves several kinds of evidence that do not always align smoothly. Texts may describe sacred origins. Archaeology may show gradual development. Royal inscriptions may celebrate kings with polished confidence. Household remains may reveal cramped rooms, ordinary labour, and quiet inequality. Myth lifts the world upward, Excavation pulls it back into mud. Both movements matter. Open scholarly debate continues over how much weight to give texts when reconstructing early history. Some specialists trust administrative records most, because they are close to daily transactions. Others value literary texts as windows into ideology, memory, and theology, while warning against reading them literally. Archaeologists often press for context, asking where an object was found, how it was used, and what surrounded it. The question is not which evidence wins. The question is how the pieces speak together. You imagine a conference room far from the desert heat. Scholars sit with maps, photographs, tablets, charts, and coffee strong enough to revive a minor dynasty. One argues for economic structure. Another emphasizes ritual practice. Another cautions that later copies cannot be treated as early eyewitnesses. Someone points to new survey data. Someone else asks whether the sample is too small. This is not confusion. It is careful uncertainty. The public often wants archaeology to deliver one buried secret, preferably with a dramatic inscription and a convenient conclusion. Real archaeology is more demanding. It produces probabilities, revised chronologies, cautious translations, and arguments that improve because people keep disagreeing intelligently. That disagreement is not failure. It is the engine of knowledge. You stand again in the trench as the day grows hotter. The exposed soil begins to dry. Shadows shorten. A worker calls softly, and everyone turns. A small object has appeared near a floor surface. It is a cylinder seal, perhaps, or only a worn bead. The difference matters. Its location matters more. An object without context is a sentence torn from a page. The team records before removing. That pause is sacred in its own modern way. Ancient scribes preserved order through clay. Modern archaeologists preserve context through measurement, photography, notes, and restraint. Both are fighting the same enemy, which is disappearance. Both know that once a surface is disturbed, it cannot be exactly replaced. To excavate is to destroy carefully in order to learn. That is an uncomfortable truth. The mystery deepens because every answer is partial. We know Sumerian cities organized labor, built temples, developed writing, produced rich literature, and shaped later Mesopotamian culture. We know the divine world structured social imagination. We know kingship, flood memory, celestial signs, and scribal education formed powerful systems of meaning. But we do not know everything. We do not know the first spoken versions of many myths. We do not know how every household understood the gods. We do not know which oral memories disappeared before writing caught them. We do not know how ordinary workers felt about the cosmic order that placed burdens on their backs. The tablets speak loudly in some places and almost not at all in others. A city can be excavated for decades and still keep secrets. The ground is good at that. You look across the site at sunset, when the trenches turn purple and the mound regains its silence. Tools are gathered, finds are stored, notes are checked. A line of footprints crosses the dust where ancient walls once stood. The modern team leaves for the evening, and the mound seems to close behind them. No trumpet sounds, no final truth rises, only fragments wait under the remaining earth, and questions gather around them like night birds. The archaeologist's task is not to force the ancient city to become simple. It is to let the evidence remain complex enough to be true. In that restraint, and the old mystery survives with dignity. The tablets, the walls, the flood deposits, the seals, the broken bowls, and the silent rooms all offer pieces of a civilization that knew how to write, build, count, pray, rule, and wonder. Modern archaeology can explain much of it. Still, at the edge of every trench, there is a small darkness where the next question waits. Work out 1150, section 13. The silence begins between two lines of clay, where the signs stop and the broken surface takes over. You're not looking at absence in the usual sense. You're looking at a shaped absence, one made by fire, water, time, copying, neglect, and the limits of ancient intention. The tablets do not say everything. That may be their deepest lesson. They name kings, but rarely pause over the workers' tired knees. They list rations, but do not describe the taste of hunger before the grain arrived. They praise gods in polished hymns, but do not always show how a frightened child understood thunder at night. They preserve creation, flood, divine order, and royal legitimacy, but leave countless ordinary thoughts outside the archive. History is full of locked rooms. Some doors were never built. A mainstream historical fact helps steady this quiet place. Most surviving Sumerian and Mesopotamian texts come from institutional, educational, administrative, religious, or elite contexts. Scholars at major research centers such as Chicago, Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania have long emphasized that archives are not neutral mirrors of society. They preserve what literate systems chose or needed to record. That means the tablets are evidence, but never the whole world. You stand in a narrow street at dusk. The mud brick walls lean slightly inward, holding the day's heat. A woman carries water in a jar, her steps careful over uneven ground. A boy runs past with dust on his ankles. An old man sits near a doorway, watching shadows lengthen across the lane. None of them may leave a text, not directly. Their lives may survive only through traces, a ration entry, a burial object, a worn grinding stone, a cooking pot blackened by fire, a seal impressed on clay, a house plan beneath later rubble. Their world exists around the written record like breath around a lamp flame, visible only when it moves something. The tablets speak from desks, schools, temples, palaces, and storehouses. The street answers in objects. This gap matters because the great Sumerian mysteries often come wrapped in written authority. A tablet says kingship descended from heaven. A myth says humans were shaped for labor. A hymn says a city was chosen by a god. A lament says divine favor withdrew. These statements are powerful, but they are not simple windows into every mind. They are crafted voices. They have purposes. Some were meant to teach, some to praise, some to justify, some to remember, some to organize goods and labor, some to preserve sacred language, some to make a ruler appear pleasingly inevitable, which is a favorite activity of rulers everywhere, ancient and modern. The clay may be ancient. The public relations instinct is eternal. The quirky tidbit is that some tablets survive because they were discarded as failed schoolwork, broken practice pieces, or outdated administrative records. A text that shaped modern understanding may have been ancient rubbish. Imagine becoming famous in 5,000 years because someone threw your homework into a corner. It is both humbling and mildly unfair. You move into a ruined house, reconstructed in imagination. The roof is gone. The walls rise only to the waist. A hearth sits against one side. A storage jar is sunk into the floor. The space is intimate, smaller than temple courtyards and royal halls. Here, history lowers its voice. What prayers were spoken here? What jokes passed over the evening meal? What fear entered when a child coughed too long? The tablets rarely answer. They may record legal matters, property, marriage contracts, adoptions, debts, and inheritance in later Mesopotamian settings. But even those documents are formal. They tell you what society needed certified. They do not tell you how the room felt after the agreement was made. A contract can mention a family. It cannot hold the whole family. Open scholarly debate continues over how historians should reconstruct the lives of non-elite people from fragmentary evidence. Some researchers rely heavily on administrative records, using them to trace labor, gender, household economy, and social hierarchy. Others combine text with archaeology, bioarchaeology, and environmental data to recover daily experience. The debate is careful because the missing voices cannot simply be invented. That restraint is important. It is tempting to fill every silence with a story. You can imagine the worker resenting the temple, the priest doubting the ritual, the scribe laughing at the king, the mother fearing the gods, the child ignoring all theology and chasing a beetle. Some of these things surely happened in some form. Humans have always been wonderfully inconvenient, but evidence must guide imagination. Without it, history becomes costume. So you listen for what the texts do not say through what they accidentally reveal. A rationalist may show gendered labour patterns, a legal tablet may reveal property concerns, a school text may expose discipline and ambition, a myth may show what elites believed order should mean, a city plan may show crowding, access, and social separation. Silence is not empty when surrounded by clues. It has edges. One silence concerns women. Women appear in Sumerian and Mesopotamian records in many roles, including workers, priestesses, weavers, household members, property holders in some contexts, and figures in myth. Yet male scribal and institutional perspectives often dominate the surviving texts. The result is not absence, but distortion. Women are visible, then partially hidden by the angle of record keeping. Another silence concerns emotion. The laments can be deeply moving, and some literary works express grief with extraordinary force, but the emotional life of ordinary people remains difficult to reach. You can see destruction in a city lament. You can see mourning in burial. You can see concern in letters from later periods. Yet the daily emotional weather of most Sumerians is lost. Their tears dried without tablets. Their laughter too. A third silence concerns doubt. Did everyone believe the official myths in the same way? Did a labourer feel comfort in being part of divine service, or resentment at carrying another load? Did a scribe privately question the enormous reigns he copied? Did a priest perform rituals with serene conviction every day? The archive rarely lets private doubt stand naked in the light. It prefers official surfaces, yet humans live beneath surfaces. They obey and question. They serve and negotiate. They believe deeply on one day, then worry on another. A civilization is never only its formal texts. It is also hesitation, gossip, habit, boredom, fatigue, tenderness, fear, and all the small contradictions that rarely become monumental. You walk back toward the archive, carrying these silences with you. The tablets now seem different. They are still precious. They still hold names, myths, numbers, hymns, and administrative worlds that would otherwise be lost, but they also stand beside an unseen crowd. For every named king, countless unnamed builders. For every hymn, countless ordinary prayers. For every myth of origin, countless births in dim rooms where no scribe was present. This does not weaken the tablets. It makes them more human. The greatest mystery may not be hidden in a secret line or forbidden inscription. It may lie in the imbalance between what was written and what was lived. Sumerian texts reveal a civilization trying to preserve order, but life was always larger than order. The clay caught what it could. The rest moved through streets, courtyards, fields, canals, bodies, and breath. Night returns to the city. A door closes softly. A lamp goes out. Somewhere, a tablet dries with a king's name on it. Nearby, someone falls asleep without ever knowing that future minds will search these ruins for meaning. The written world survives in fragments, but the unwritten world surrounds it like darkness around a flame. You lean close to the clay once more. The signs speak clearly where they remain. The broken places speak differently. They remind you that history is not only discovery, but humility before what cannot be recovered. And perhaps the deepest truth of Sumer is not that the tablets explain everything. It is that they still whisper, even while keeping most of the human night to themselves. Word count 1153. Just section 14. The old story is still watching from a shelf of clay, small enough to fit in your hands, large enough to trouble the edges of civilization. The room is quiet now. The lamps have lowered. Dust rests on the table like a second skin, and the air carries the faint scent of earth, wax, and long patience. Tablet lies before you. It does not glow. It does not open like a magic door. It waits in the humble manner of ancient objects, trusting that silence can be more persuasive than noise. Its signs are shallow in places, sharp in others. Its broken edge suggests a sentence that vanished before anyone could ask it to stay. You have entered a world where writing begins with accounts, yet grows into myth, where kingship descends from heaven, yet cities rise from mud, where gods live in households, humans carry burdens, numbers stretch time, floods divide memory, stars speak through patterns, and scribes guard the gates of what can be known. The mystery has not become smaller, it has become better behaved. A mainstream historical fact remains clear. Sumerian civilization left the earliest substantial body of written evidence from the ancient world, including administrative records, literary compositions, hymns, myths, royal inscriptions, and school texts. Scholars at leading institutions such as Chicago, Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania continue to study these materials as foundations of early urban history, religion, literature, and social organization. That is solid ground. But even solid ground can be surrounded by mist. The Sumerian texts reveal a civilization that looked backward into ages already considered ancient, even by those who copied them. They do not present the past as a simple rise from ignorance into order. They often imagine an order in something older than ordinary humanity, something granted, assigned, disturbed, and restored. That is why the tablets still feel awake. They do not merely record what people did, they preserve how people explained their place beneath powers they could not control. The river might rise, the harvest might fail, the king might fall, the god might turn away, a sign in the sky might unsettle the palace, a dream might require interpretation, a name might survive only if pressed correctly into clay. In such a world, meaning is not optional. It is a form of shelter. You see the ancient city one final time, not as a single place, but as an arrangement of senses. Mud brick walls warm under afternoon light, reeds whisper near dark water, beer ferments in jars, wool hangs from a loom, a stylus taps softly in a schoolroom, a priest steps through a doorway scented with smoke, a worker lowers a basket and rolls his shoulders in relief. The world is ordinary, the world is sacred, both are true at once. The quirky tidbit is that some of the most famous voices from this deep past survive through small, unimpressive objects that could have been swept away as debris. A king's cosmic claim, a schoolchild's copied myth, a delivery of barley, and a divine hymn might all depend on clay lumps no larger than snacks. History can be majestic, but its filing system is often embarrassing. Still, those clay pieces endured, palaces collapsed, languages shifted, temples fell silent, the marshes changed, empires rose over the memory of older cities, then became old themselves. Yet the tablets remained in the earth, hardened by accident, hidden by ruin, guarded by the same dust that buried them. Time destroyed the world that made them. Time also preserved its voice. That contradiction is at the heart of the mystery. The Sumerians are gone, but their questions remain unusually close. Who owns civilization? Why must humans labor? How does power become legitimate? What happens when water breaks the order? Can the sky be read? Can memory survive the death of its speakers? These are ancient questions, but they have not died. They have only changed clothing. Open scholarly debate continues over how best to interpret the deepest layers of Sumerian tradition. Some researchers emphasize political theology, where myths and king lists legitimize institutions. Others explore memory, ritual, environment, and literary transmission, asking how older experiences became sacred narratives. A cautious view allows the text to be symbolic, historical, political, and poetic at the same time. That caution feels right. The tablets do not need to be forced into one answer. They are stronger when allowed to remain layered. A flood can be environmental memory and sacred rupture. A king list can be ideology and inherited tradition. A creation myth can explain labor and express existential unease. A temple can be economy, devotion, theatre, and power. Ancient life rarely fits into modern boxes. It was far too busy surviving. You stand beside the river in darkness. The stars appear above the plain, quiet and cold. The city behind you is not fully sleeping. Someone coughs. An animal shifts in a pen. A door latch clicks. Far away. Water moves against a bank with the same patient sound it made before writing, before kings, before the first scribe shaped wet clay into memory. You understand now why the old story refuses to close. The mystery is not one forbidden fact hidden by scholars. It is the larger strangeness of early civilization itself. People built cities from mud and made them homes for gods. They counted grain and imagined cosmic order. They served powers above them and still became the keepers of those powers in writing. They believed humanity came late, yet humanity became the witness. That is the quiet reversal. The servant remembers the master. The worker preserves the god. The scribe outlives the king. Perhaps this is why Sumer feels so ancient and so near. Its people feared water, watched stars, obeyed institutions, joked about school, worried about food, sought divine favor, and tried to keep disorder outside the walls. They were not like us in every way. That would be too easy. But they were human in the deep ways that matter during the night. They wanted the world to mean something. They wanted their labor to belong somewhere. They wanted the past to hold. The tablet on the table remains still. No final revelation rises from it. No secret civilization steps out of the broken signs to explain everything with perfect neatness. Instead, the clay offers something more honest and more haunting. It offers fragments that reveal how much was imagined, organized, feared, and hoped in the first cities. The old story watches because it is unfinished. Not unfinished because scholars have failed, though many questions remain. Unfinished because human beings keep returning to it with new worries, new tools, and new dreams. Each generation reads the tablets differently. Each one finds its own reflection in the wedge marks. Authority, labor, disaster, memory, the longing for order. The river darkens, the lamp fades, the clay keeps its patience. Perhaps the Sumerian texts reveal the mystery archaeologists still cannot explain because the mystery was never meant to be solved in a single sentence. Perhaps it lives in the tension between mud and heaven, between evidence and silence, between what the tablets say and what they refuse to say. And perhaps the story is not yet complete. Now let the city recede, let the walls soften into shadow, and let the river carry away the last hard edges of thought. You do not need to hold every name, every city, every god, or every broken sign. They can rest where they have rested for thousands of years, in clay, in dust, in the long quiet below the surface. The night is gentle now. The reed beds move with a faint sound, like slow breathing beside dark water. The stars remain high above the plain, no longer demanding interpretation. They simply shine, distant and calm, while the old tablets sleep beneath their patient light. You may leave the archive door half open. Nothing urgent follows you, only the memory of warm mud brick cooling air, and a small tablet waiting in silence. Only the thought that people long ago also looked upward, wondered deeply, worked hard, feared loss, loved their homes, and searched for meaning in a world that never explained itself completely. Let that be enough for tonight. Let the unanswered parts stay unanswered. There is comfort in not forcing the ancient world to speak too loudly. There is peace in letting broken clay remain broken clay, while still honouring the hands that shaped it. The city fades into blue darkness. The canal grows still. The last lamp lowers. You breathe slowly. The old story keeps watch, but it asks nothing more from you now. Its mystery can wait until morning, as all patient mysteries do, and under the same wide sky, beyond time, beyond dust, beyond the sleeping river, the first cities grow quiet again.